Hi, how you doing? My name is Chris Robson. Welcome to the joy of PCG. A little bit of a homage there to Bob Ross. Now, I am going to be talking to you for a short while about PCG with some explanations and examples about what PCG is, how I use it, how you can use it, and so on and so forth. So, I think the best thing to start off with really is, what is PCG? Well, PCG stands for Procedural Content Generation. And what PCG procedural content generation allows us to do is create huge amounts of content inside of our levels in a manner that makes it look natural, because it's going to follow certain rules, certain kind of procedures in order to do that. Now, to explain further, most of the time when I've been teaching for the past, well, at this point 25 years, a lot of my focus in the research side of the teaching has been trying to find ways for people who are building massive detailed scenes to be able to place huge amounts of foliage, or how to place minute detail inside of scenes so that they look lived in. Now, this doesn't just apply to grass and trees and large areas. I'm sure if you're interested in PCG or have heard of it already, you'll have seen numerous lessons and tutorials from people showing how to place grass, trees, rocks and all that kind of funky stuff on top of landscapes to make it look lived in. And that's fantastic, okay? That's a really good use of PCG, and certainly one of the things that you can be doing. But another thing that you can do with PCG is you can literally build structures that look like they've been handmade. Okay, now this isn't to take away any of your artistic skills, quite the opposite. This relies on our artistic skills as well, in order to get something that is highly visual, yet has all those minutiae of what look like slight imperfections but aren't, because it's all a trick, it's all smoke and mirrors. Now, first things first, let's talk about how we turn on PCG, because if you try to use PCG at the minute, if you try and follow along with this lesson, you'll be like, oh, Chris, what are you doing? You're deceiving me, I can't use PCG. Well, you can, but what you need to do is you need to go to over here, Edit, and select Plugins, so you get this beautiful window here, and just type in PCG. Now, bear in mind, you can't do this if you're using an earlier version of Unreal Engine, something like 4.27 or even 4.02. Wouldn't recommend it. But in later versions, in the 5 series of Unreal Engine, you will see the Procedural Content Generation Framework, which is still in an early beta. At this time, it's at 0.2. Now, all you need to do is just click this little box here. It'll say, are you sure I'm a beta? You'll go, yeah, please, and just restart Unreal Engine. Off you go. That's it. Now, there's lots of other things here as well. There's some lovely little samples and lots of other fun little things here. But my focus at the minute is going to be on the Procedural Content Generation Framework. So later on, you may want to do external data interoperation, where, you're interacting with external data formats, or you might want to mess around with geometry scripts, or mess around with water even. But for me, for the moment, just this one. Now, I'm going to assume that you've rushed off and done that and hit pause. Don't worry, I don't even know. I'm going to move my creaky chair, and I want to show you a couple of things that PCG can do. Again, bear in mind that I'm assuming you've seen, some of the wizards out there that just populate ground with grass and things like that, and that's fantastic. But what I like to do is something slightly different. Now, let me just get my tool set ready. Now, the first example I've got here is my BP PCG gantries, okay? Now, don't worry, okay, this is just an example for you to look at. We're going to build an example rather than you relying on stuff that other people have made, like me. But I just want to show you what it can do. So if I just drag in my BP PCG gantries, if you imagine that I needed a bridge with some rails on it to connect 2 large pieces of machinery inside of a level, this PCG, all it is really is just a spline. And we can see the spline just here if I zoom in. But what this spline is doing is it's binding a procedural generation framework to itself. So if I select the node, the points inside the spline, so in this case I'll select this one here, and just drag it along, what it's going to do is it's going to procedurally generate this entire piece of bridge, okay, this gantry-way, which I need. And I can make it as long as I like. I can even hold, alt and drag, and create extra points if I want. And every time I create extra points, you'll notice that it moves along the legs. Now if I want a leg at a specific point, I could just go right click, add a spline point here, and it'll add more legs for me. So it's a very, very versatile way of doing things. And as long as the meshes have got collisions in place, which these ones have, what I could do is I could grab a cube just here, just use it as a start position. There we go. Move it a little bit closer. And I can walk along my gantry. So right click, play from here, and let's go for a walk along my gantry. A little bit fast because I'm in first person flying mode, but you get the point, okay? Very detailed. We can use as much stuff as we want in this. Now, would it shock you badly if I was to tell you that there's only 8 meshes inside of this? Because there is. There's only 8 meshes. That's what makes this so efficient. We're creating a procedural system that's only got 8 meshes inside of it. But because of the way these 8 meshes are placed, it looks like we've created a really complicated piece, you know, ourselves, by hand. Now, technically we have, we've still built the framework for the PCG, but all we've done really is defined a set of rules. Sorry about that, I've got a slight cough. Now, let me show you this in a slightly simpler way. So for this, I'm going to use cliff wooden walkway. So let me just delete this. Now, this next one is PCG cliff wooden walkway. I'll just drag this in. I'm not going to use this one too much. I just want to demonstrate it to you, okay? This one is basically a cave walkway system. Now, we can see here that we've got these individual blocks of wood. We've got nails inside the wood holding it down so it looks realistic. And we've got these little underneath pieces here of wood as well. So it looks like it's completely supported. This was made out of 2 meshes. This is an incredibly light PCG. Good thing about this is that, you know, we can use this in our scene, and we've only got 2 meshes, 2 materials. And so if we were to use things like instance geometry, this thing would be lovely and clean, so clean to use. Absolutely a beast when I use it inside of systems, and really, really handy. And of course, collision boxes mean we can walk on top of it. Now, this is what I'm going to focus on today. Remember I said it's got 2 meshes in it. So let me just delete this, because we'll mess around with it some more once we've built it. I think that's part of the fun of it. But what we have here is we have this mesh, and we have this mesh. And I'm going to show you where these meshes are. So, if I was to go over to Fab, what we have here is Quixel's Rusty Steak. I've already got this downloaded. It's free. Go and grab it. Once you've grabbed that, I would like you to go and get Wooden Bollard, okay? Download that too. Now, that's all you need. That's it. If you want to get other things and elaborate on this, please do, okay? I encourage you fully to explore the environment that you're building and make more detailed things. But for the moment, this is all we need. Okay, so how do I get started? How do I get started making the PCG? Well, first things first, let's get our little browser up. So here's my content browser. And as you can see, I've got a few things in here because I brought across a few test projects to use inside of it. Now, in my content folder, I've got a folder called My PCGs. And inside of My PCGs, I'm going to make a new folder. Here it is here. And I'm going to call it PCG underscore gantries. Okay, so I'm going to make a wooden gantry, but I'm going to call it PCG gantries. If I go into there now, obviously it's lovely and empty. I've got plenty of space to do stuff. Okay, so what am I going to create? Well, if you remember, we turned on the PCG framework. That's very, very important. We need to be able to access our PCG framework. By turning it on, that means that we can create PCGs. So if I do a right click, you'll now see here's PCG, and underneath that we've got a PCG graph and an instance of a PCG graph. Now I want to create the actual PCG graph, okay? This is a rule set that's going to basically allow us to create and place our geometry along that spline. So I'm going to click here, and I'm going to call it PCG underscore wooden underscore gantry, and just click Control S. Okay, so we have our PCG wooden gantry. That's fab. Now what we need is something to control it. Because remember what I said about, we can just dump PCGs into our world. If I just had a simple kind of scatter graph instead of my PCG, which just said, sample a landscape, and then inside the sampled area, dump grass and rotate a little bit so it looks natural. That's what a lot of people do. They just use that and they just drag this into the world. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do instead is we're going to control exactly where the PCG places its generated geometry using a spline, nothing else. So if I do a right click here, and we can see obviously we've got all our normal common things that we're going to create. I'm going to create basic asset blueprint class. There it is there. For its parent class, we're just going to choose an actor. So we're just going to place it inside the world. Okay, all our world is a stage. This is the actor. And for its name, we need to use common naming standards because it'll make things so much easier for us. So we'll call the other one PCG underscore wooden underscore gantry. So I'm going to call this BP underscore PCG underscore wooden underscore gantry. Done. Okay, that's it. So Control S just to save it. Okay, we've got everything we need. I've already imported into my project the items I'm going to need anyway. You see I've got my wooden bollard here, and I have my rusty stake just here. Okay? So, let's open up this BP PCG wooden gantry and get it ready to be used. Okay, this is not complicated, I promise. If you're a little bit nervous about blueprints and things, don't worry, take it slow, okay? We all started somewhere. So BP PCG wooden gantry. Open that up. There we go. So here's our friendly BP interface, and I'll just get this so it fits on the screen nicely. Move it a little bit more, hang on. There we go. Fits on nicely. Now, what I'm going to do is over here, where it says default scene route, I'm going to select that and I'm going to click add. I don't need to explain what most of this stuff inside the blueprint is. Not really important. I just need to click add, and I'm going to type in spline. Now you can see here we've got a few things: a spline nav modifier, spline mesh, and just spline. We want spline. There we go. And now you can see we've got our spline inside of our scene. Next, what I need to do is just take my spline and just drag it onto my default scene route. And what that means is my spline is now the root of my blueprints. Okay, this is like the bottom level. I'm going to hit compile, hit save. That way it's compiled now. We have software. If you've never done this before, well done, you're a programmer. And I'm going to click add and add PCG. Can you see here we've got two things. We've got PCG generation source and I've got PCG component. If I add PCG component, hit compile and save, and just scroll down here on the right, you can see here we've got this little box here, instance, and this is asking for a graph. Well, what I can do is I can just open this up and I can find my PCG graph inside of here, or I can just drag it across, because I've created it just here, into this folder here. So if I select it, click the little arrow, you selected asset from content browser, there, it's done. So now our graph is working. Fabulous. We have made a PCG linked to a spline inside of a blueprint. Okay, so we can close that down now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my main screen over here. There we go. And I've got this nice little canvas. I like to put a white cube on things sometimes so I can kind of see things a little bit better. And what I'm going to do is, firstly, I'm going to reduce the size of my thumbnails. There we go, because they are huge and they don't need to be. There we go. And then I'm going to just pop that there. Drag my BP PCG wooden gantry just to here, and all you'll see is this very, very simple, very, very empty spline, nothing else. Now you're probably saying to yourself, Chris, where is my awesome thing that you promised me we were going to make? I promise you, it's not far off, okay? It really isn't. First, we need to understand how PCG works and what we do with it. So, deep breath. So, the first thing we need to do is we need to open up our PCG wooden gantry here, because we haven't used this yet. So I'm just going to double click on it, and it's going to open it off screen, because it always does. There we go, bring it down here. Now, close that down. We already have our spline out here, so we can kind of see if anything's happening, which is cool. When we first start, you'll see we've got an input graph and an output graph. These two nodes here, input and output. We've got a load of stuff over here on the left, depending on which version of Unreal Engine you're using. Down here you've got some inspectors and other things, okay? For the minute I want a fairly plain graph. I don't want a lot of stuff in it. So, if I just remove my debug object tree, and I can probably turn off my palette for the moment. You know, you can turn on and off all these things if you need to, or you can just drag them out and move them or whatever. But what I want to do is come down here, and I want to do the first thing, which is to get my spline data. Now, if I do a right click, and here we go, I get up this nice easy to search kind of selection of things. I can also grab it from over here if I want to, and just type in get spline data. And here you go, it's a spatial. It's going to build a collection from selected actors. There we go. Close that down again. Now, if I select this, we can see some information about it over here on the right. Okay, so there's an actor filter. This is the important thing. So at the minute it's interrogating itself. This means it's going to interrogate anything it belongs to. Now remember, we bound the PCG to that spline. So as far as it's concerned, that spline is also itself. So down here, this little spline that we've selected, that you can just see, okay, this little spline is going to be sampled. Now, if I was to select the get spline data and just hit D for debug, you can see that something's happening there when I turn it on and off. It's sampling at that spline, okay, and what it's doing is it's creating little sample points along it and showing us that it's done so. Now, I'm not going to include children, I'm just going to include self. If I wanted to, I could just say all world actors and it would look for all splines, and so what I could then do is put in tag names and have it selected by tag and so on and so forth. But for the minute I'm just doing it self, so it's a self-contained blueprint that's going to do this. Okay, let's look at the next piece. So, what I need to do is I need to sample the actual spline that it's sitting on, okay, this little piece of data here. Now I'm going to do Control S just to save, and I'm going to make my spline just by clicking on one of the nodes a little bit longer. There we go, and I'll just duplicate my little white base here so I can see it a bit easier. There we go, and we can see our white line. Okay, just there. Now I'm going to type spline sampler. So if I drag my output, S-P-L-I-N-E-S-A-M, there we go, spline sampler. And what the spline sampler is going to do is it's going to sample the data on that spline at points that we select. Again, we can hit D for debug if you want. It just selects more or less everything there. So over here, if we look at the settings on the right, and I'm only going to explain settings that we absolutely need, so that it's not going to kind of cause us any mental anguish, as it were. There we go. For the dimension here, we can choose whether to sample the entire spline, whether it's horizontal, vertical, and its volume, or if it was a closed loop, we can even sample the interior, which is a really cool thing we can do. But I'm just going to do the dimension on spline. Now we can choose how many subdivisions we have per segment, because at the minute it's doing it per segment. So, you know, if I was to extend it, we'd create another segment, whereas if I was just to move, you know, the spline point, that wouldn't be creating another segment. Or we can do it by distance. So if I click distance, we could say every, let's say 50 centimeters, okay, it will do another sample. And then every other 50 centimeters and every other 50 centimeters. Okay, so it's just a way of doing this stuff. Now I'm going to say, well, what way do I want to do it? I suppose I probably want to do it by distance, and I'll be wanting to do it by a distance of about 45 centimeters. Okay, because the idea is that those big bollards that I've got there are fairly large, and I want slight space in between them because they're going to become a pathway. Yeah. So 45 centimeters apart. Okay, so great. What next? Well, if I'm sampling along there, and bear in mind if I just hit D again, you see it's just showing us that big line. What I want to do is every 45 centimeters, I now want to place a mesh. So what I'm going to do is, if I drag this out, I'm going to type in static mesh spawner. There we go. Now what this is going to allow me to do, if you look over here, there's loads of options, is it's going to allow me to assign a mesh that will be spawned every 45 centimeters. So I can click plus here, and you'll notice it gives me a nice array of information I can put in. So I'll click open just here, do it again, descriptor, and there it is, static mesh. That's where I'm going to put the mesh that I want to put in. Remember, we're only doing things at a fairly basic level at the moment. So I'll go and find my bollard, which is all the way down here, wooden bollard. There we go. And I'm just going to click here to use selected assets from content browser. And can you see what's happened in the main window? We're now getting all of these bollards just here being placed along the line at a 45 centimeter distance from each other. Okay, so exactly 45 centimeters. Great, that's kind of what we wanted, wasn't it? But they're not facing the right direction, and they look uniform. Very important. Remember, PCG, the whole idea of things is to make it look kind of natural. Well, okay, what we can do then is we can, we could move the spline, we could rotate the spline 90 degrees, so they're lying downwards. But that's kind of silly, isn't it? What we should do instead is we should actually affect the mesh before it's put down. And to do that isn't very difficult. We can just transform the point itself. Okay, because this is just a point of data, and then it's having some mesh projected onto it. So if I was to just drag my output here and type in transform points, what I can actually do, if you look over here, is I've got opportunities to offset it on its XYZ, rotate it on its XYZ, and scale it on its XYZ. But I also have maximums and minimums. And what this means is that I can give it a range to choose from, and it can decide randomly what it's going to do within that range. And this is where we start getting a lot of power. Okay, let me just alt-click on this line and connect these two together instead. There we go. And what I'm going to do is just make it a little bit more compact over here, so we can kind of see what's going on. Okay, now I want all of these to lie down, yeah? So if I want all of these to lie down, what I'm going to do is go at my transform point, and this is going to be a rotation operation, isn't it? So for example, I could rotate it for 90 degrees on the X. And if I choose my minimum rotation on the X to be 90 degrees, and my maximum rotation on the X to be 90 degrees, you'll notice that it's lying down exactly at 90 degrees. Now, if I wanted to add some variation into that, I could say, well, maybe I only wanted to go 88 to 92 degrees. And what you'll notice now is an unevenness of placement in these. So they're being placed, but they're being placed at a slightly jaunty angle. Now, this becomes useful when we combine it with a few other things. So for the minute, let's set our rotation back to 90 degrees. And let's look at something else important here. Now, these splines, when I first started doing PCGs, I was guilty of this. I'd always have the PCG running down, the left-hand side and then creator off the right. But it makes more sense really for our PCG to be in the middle. Okay, it allows us to place things a little bit more easily. So what we can do is we can look at the actual length of our mesh. And I can see here my mesh's size is 23 by 15 by 79. This means that if I was to look at that 79, which I know is at Z height, but remember it's lying on the side, I could offset by maybe 40. And if I offset by 40, or rather negative 40, then that would be 40 on one side, 30 on the other. If I was to offset by negative 35, it would be round about the middle. So, let's see if we can do that. Well, we can. We just need to find the correct offset value. Okay, so Up here again, let's find which one it's going to be. So if I put minus 35 in the x here, you'll notice that they start pushing themselves closer together. And if I put positive 35 here, okay, we start getting it where they're kind of moving further towards each other, further apart. That could be useful, but not yet. So reset that. And instead let's try minus 35 on the y and plus 35 on the y. Okay, so now we can see that we're getting these things set and they're basically zigzagging along. So we can see that this is definitely the one that we need to change them on. Okay, so how do we get them to line up? Well, to be honest, minus 35 is going to be the central point, pretty much, isn't it? So if I change this value over here to minus 35, not minus 0.5, there we go. They're all going to line up pretty much in the middle. But we want some offsetting on this. We don't want them to look perfect. We never wanted them to look perfect. So what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to add the variation. Remember, this is what it's about. So I'm going to say I want a variation between minus 37 and minus 33. And now look, they're not being placed quite accurately. By that I mean that some are lower, some are higher. Perfect. Just what I need. Now, if we go back to our rotation, remember what I said about, setting up our rotations so that they look like, again, some of them are kind of slightly listed at an angle and so forth. We can now mess around with those values. So if I was to put minus 1 into the y and the z, and then positive 1 into the rotational maximum for the y and the z, these things now are being placed and they're nearly straight, but there's imperfections in their placing. So as you can see, fairly close together, but not quite close together enough. They're being placed, but they're not quite straight because, in reality, wood's going to warp and move around and stuff. That's what tends to happen with wood. And they're not exactly 100% level with each other, and that's perfect. Okay, now some other things we can do as well. Well, think about the offset, okay? So I'm going to set the offsets on this, and I'm going to do an offset distance difference of minus 1 to plus 1. And now some of them are going to be higher and some of them are going to be lower. Again, this is going to give us that kind of more naturalistic look as these things get placed. Okay, that's great, that's working. Now, the only thing I need to do on top of this is, because I'm making this as a kind of a different way to the previous one, I'm going to hit Control S, just to save everything, and hit S or save inside my wooden gantry here. I also want to mess around a little bit with the scale. Now, when you're messing around with the scale, you've got to be careful because you'll notice that we've got these locked. It always locks them for you, just to keep things a bit safe. So I'm going to unlock these, and I'm going to want to unlock uniform scale. And by doing that, that means that I can have non-uniform random scaling if I need to. So if you look, I put 0.5 into all of these just to show you what happens. You can always click the reset this property to its default values just to shoot them back. But that was just really to show you kind of what happens if you put different values into these. Okay? Now, the one I'm most interested in changing the value of is this y value. Because remember, we've slipped it over onto its side. It's not the z value that we're affecting, really. It's the y value, we're compressing it. So I'm going to change that to 0.2, and I'm going to change the maximum to 0.24. Okay, so some are going to be slightly thicker, and some are going to be slightly thinner. And to be perfectly honest with you, I think these could probably do with being a little bit closer together because our path looks a little bit dangerous. So what I can do is, because none of this is destructive, come back to my spline sampler and change this perhaps to 32, or maybe 27. There we go, 27 looks like a good amount, you see? Great. All right, so we have our planks coming down here. They're looking okay. Now, what I need to do is I need to build a support way for this. So I want something running along each side that's going to look like it's supporting our planks. Okay, because this is kind of how things work. We're thinking about logically how these planks work, so they're not just going to be floating in space. Now, we don't need to get ourselves another plank for this to work, do we? We don't need another bollard. We've already got one here. See this static mesh spawner? So what I can do is I can decide for myself how long I want this to be. this piece that I'm about to create. Now bear in mind what I'm about to create is kind of a cross brace, so if I drag this in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a piece kind of like that, that's going to lie underneath here and look like the planks are on top of it, okay, because remember it's all illusion, and then it'll give it stability, it'll make it look like that's how it's supposed to be, yeah? So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the same piece of wood, but I'm going to have it in a slightly different transformed state. So for this to work, I can't use this spline sampler because I know that my actual wooden bollard I'm using is 79 in length. So what I need to do is create a quick copy of it. So I'll select it, do a Control C, Control V. There we go, I've got a copy. And I'll change the distance increment, sorry, to 79, okay, which is, you know, the Z height. And I can take the same spline data, so I'm sampling the same spline, okay, but I'm just sampling it in a different way. And I can feed the output yet again to my static mesh spawner. And I'm just going to double click just to create a rerouting node. And if you look, we now have the same mesh, just in a slightly different way, appearing here. Okay, that's kind of cool. Not really, you know, again, what we're looking for, we need to transform it. Well, that's easy enough. Let's get transform points. So I'm just going to right click, type transform points. Let's connect these two together, and I'll delete this, otherwise, you know, it'll make a mess. There we are. And all we need to do really to make this work is do a little bit of scales, you know, a little bit of scaling, and we also need to do a little bit of offsetting, yeah? So again, it's going to be a case of, you know, find which offset we need, and the offset is going to be on the Y, 35, do it again here, 35. So you'll notice if I do it at 35, it comes pretty much all the way at the edge. Some are overlapping, some are not, because of the nature of what it is we've just done. We also need to rotate it. Now, last time I believe we rotated it on the X. This time we're going to rotate it on the Y. And if I rotate it 90-90, you'll notice it's not really rotating in the correct direction. So what we really need to do is rotate it by minus 90 degrees to minus 90 degrees. And I'm not going to mess around with adding any wiggle room there. I'm not going to do minus 89 to minus 91. I want it to be flat minus 90 for the stability that it's going to offer there. Okay. Now we need a little bit of offsetting for this to work as well. Reason being that if you look, we've got some slight overlap here. Bearing in mind that this is 23 in length, we're going to need to offset it by negative 12. So if I come up here to where my offsets are again, I'll set a minus 12 in the X, and you can see there that that's doing just fine. And I could keep this on the edge. I mean, I could keep this exactly where it is, okay, and it kind of looks okay. But with me and the way my brain works, I don't like that kind of wishy-washiness, okay. So what I want to do is I want to move it down so that we've got the ability to use our second mesh in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is, again, bearing in mind I want to read how big it is, 23 by 15, so half of 23, if you bring it straight down, minus 12, minus 12. And you can see now the other plank is resting on top of it. Fab. So we've got one. Now, here's the thing, we need to do it again, okay? We need it again in this exact position. So we could copy the entire transform points, connect it up, do the entire thing over again. Or, what we could do is just take the output of this transform points, there we go, and feed it into another transform points. And this will then create a second set of points that I can feed into my static mesh spawner. If your brain starts to sizzle, don't worry, just have a cup of coffee. It all makes sense, I promise. So I'll grab my transform points now, and you notice all my transforms are reset, which means that I can do all sorts of cool things with them like this. See? What that means is I can just type in minus 79 here, and minus 79 here. There we go. Start getting it in the right position. Minus 79 is too much. Okay. Let's try minus 65. And what I said, you have to use your artistic brain. You can't just, turn it off. I think -60 actually is going to do it. Look at that. There we go. So now we've got this bound on either side by these logs. Well, bollards. Now, one thing that you may have noticed, okay, and I'll be shocked if you haven't, is obviously all these pieces of wood are the same piece of wood, sharing the same texture. But if you have a variety of bollards, and there are a variety of bollards available from fab.com, then what you could do is you could add more mesh entries and put more of them in. As long as they're roughly the same size, just stick them all in. And what it will do is it will randomly choose between them. I do this all the time for wooden walls and things like that, to create walls from just 4 planks. Because with 4 planks, think about it, okay, you can turn it upside down, that's one different look. You can turn it the other way round, that's 3 looks now. You can turn it upside down while it's backward, that's 4 looks. 4 looks multiplied by 4 planks, You've got a combination of 16 straight off the bat before you go any further. And you can really, once we start mixing up the scales and things like that, you can get an enormous, enormous, enormous amount of detailed, non-repeating geometry. I mean, our graph here, look at it, it's actually quite simple, but it's powerful, it's doing cool things. Okay, so we've done that, we're getting our spline data, we're sampling our spline, as you can see here, every 27. I want to use this spline sampler for something else. Remember, we've got a nail, and the nail's important. It's called a spike, because I think it's actually a railroad spike, but you need to use it. So, over here, I'm going to drag this out, I'm going to type static mesh spawner, because we have to use a separate one. There we go, static mesh spawner. And inside of here, I'm going to create a new mesh entry, open it up, open the descriptor. I'm going to select my rusty stake, just here, and push it into there. There we go. Now, we may not see it, because it's almost certainly, at the minute, somewhere inside of our beautiful mesh. Okay, there it is. But we are going to use our newfound artistic skills, if I can ever get this to do. There we go, there they are. Our newfound artistic skills in PCG to place this so that it looks cool. And I want 2 nails, 2 on each side, holding this to the plank. That's it. Alright, well, we're going to need transform points, let's face it, aren't we? So I'll just type in transform points, because that's all we're using this time. We're basically using our artistic skills to do this. There we go, transform points. Now, if we mess around first with just the offset, just so that we can get it kind of above, there we go, should do it. And I think I need to put it on the Y actually, so I'll put it on 20 above on the Y, just so it's kind of floating up here, yeah? Now, it needs to be rotated, quite obviously, so I'm going to rotate it on the Y as well. There we go, 90 degrees. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the rotation height. I'm just going to slow my camera down because it's getting a little bit fast, which can cause a few problems. There we go. Right, so I'm now going to bring my offset down until it's at a good height. So let's say 5 centimeters. 5, 5. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Let's make it lower. 1, 1. Nice. Okay, that's a good start. Just so that I can see where it is first. And this is going to allow me then to mess around with the offset. Remember, 35 in width, etc., etc., etc. So, offset, minimum. Well, if I change my minimum to 35 by 35, we can see it's around about the middle of here. Okay, I'm going to bring it back, maybe make it 32, 32, 33, 33. There, I like that. And it's right in the middle there, so I'm going to push it forward by 10. 10. Too much. 7. 7, still too much. Okay, it's going to be 5, 5, let's face it. Okay, so 5 forward. There we go, and we've got our nails just there, like that. Lovely. Let's bring it down. So I need to find the value that it's going to be best in. So 0 is not enough. Let's say -2 to 3. I just want to check all of them, see how fine it is. Some of them are still too high, curiously. -5. Okay, so it's going to be -2, -4 to -5. Okay, that way some are sticking out a bit and some aren't. Now, you may notice that some of them are not appearing at all. Got to remember, some of this wood is heavily offset, so I may need to adjust it. -4, maybe -3, just so that I can see the nails, because remember, some of these planks are sticking up a little bit more than others. If I want to adjust that, I could always go back and adjust the transform points for how high up each piece of wood is, but I'm going to keep it like this for the minute. Another thing I want to do is I want to mess around with the rotation. Let's say these don't necessarily need to be straight, so I'll change it to -10, +10 on the rotation, and that way each one of these will get a slight rotation. There we go. So each one of these nails now is getting rotated as it goes in. And I'll just hit save. There we go. Make sure that's okay. Yeah, it looks fine. Still think this should be in a little bit long, a little bit further, but there you go. Okay, so the next thing I need to do, so I'm just checking this is right, this is the angle I'm at, is I need to duplicate that nail so that it's back 10. Now we did that before. I'm just going to grab a transform point. There we go. And with my transform points, I'll feed that into there. And then all I need to do is change my offset. So let's see which offset it is. I think it's -20 on here. -20 on there, is it? No, the other one. Yep, that one. So -20, -20. So we're just basically moving the nails back. And then we're going to get two nails next to each other, maybe a little bit further. There we go. So now we've got two nails, two nails, two nails. Okay, and we can, like, because of the rotation we're placed in this, we're getting some real cranky little offsets here because of the way they're zooming around. So I might want to go over here and just adjust these. And then it won't quite offset it as much, because I don't want it offset that much, certainly. Have a look. Yeah, that looks about fine. Okay, so the next thing I need to do, obviously, is embed these nails down a little bit further, because they're still not down enough now, so I'll put them back down to -3, or maybe even -4. There we go. And I'm going to duplicate my transform points. So I'll do one more duplication of this. Now, what I can do is I can actually take the entire output of this and duplicate both of these, or I could just do it one at a time. I think I'm just going to do it one at a time. So I'll do a transform point. There we go. There. So I'll just connect these up and make this -60, -60, a little bit more, -70. Not enough, so it's going to be -65. There we go. Like so. So we keep getting these nails coming across, connecting these bits together. Now, the last thing I need to do is look at why. Can you see here, we're getting a lot of strange offsetting here. And you may be thinking, well, why are these being offset at such strange angles? Well, if you go to the transform points over here, if you recall, we put in -10, -10, +10, +10 on the X and Z. If I change those to 0, you've got to remember these are relative in how they're offsetting themselves. So they're offsetting themselves in a relative manner based on the, the original one that we created. So in actual fact, this is offsetting down here because it's 10 degrees, and they're all offset at different angles. So if you want them offset at different angles like that, then yes, we do have this amount in here, but we can't make it come out as a child if we do that. We have to do it individually. Okay, so something to bear in mind: if we're having these come off as child transform points and just transforming those, it's going to apply this transform first and then this transform. This transform is not going to be independent. That's why you're going to end up getting them kind of all the way out here rather than where they should be. So let's put these back to minus 65. There we go. Always like to make a couple of mistakes so that I can show you why the mistakes happen. So that's minus 60, yeah? And then all we need to do now is, if we look at this, we know that we've got an offset of minus 20 here and here. So let's just put the 20 back. So transform points, connect it together. 20, 20. Okay, and again, we can't see the nails coming through here because they're just too low down. But that's okay, because, you know, we can just adjust it if we need to, maybe minus 2.5, just so that we can see them. Still not quite high enough because this darn plank's too tall, but you get the point, okay? I think I'll make it minus, I've got this way over here, there we go, minus 3 and minus 3, there we go. And if I do that, you can actually now see where the nails are. Now, obviously, with the gantry that I created as my main example, one of the things I did was I had this come at like a 45-degree angle. This is just the same. All I've done is elaborate on how I've created it. So all I did was I then, you know, generated another level inside of my PCG, and I rotated this by 90 degrees that way, and then 45 degrees that way. And I used the placement system just to place it like that. Okay, it's not difficult. All you need to do is kind of pencil this down so you can see exactly in your mind how it's going to work. And then it comes together and you're able to get these complicated shapes. Now let's have a look at some of the more complicated PCGs, okay? So this one here is fairly simple. It works as well. If I was to grab this, just do a Control S because I'm saying it works and I don't want it to crash. If I grab this end one here and hold Alt and drag, you'll notice I'm making a curved surface, okay? I can curve this round, it'll slowly follow it, and I've got a pathway that I can follow with nails at the side. Now it's a basic example, but hopefully you'll get the point. But some of them I may not want to curve. So for example, if I look at my gantry, here we go, I'll just grab that, PCG gantry 2, as an example. This is one that doesn't have a side rail on. With this one, I don't want it to bend, because if it bends, then it's going to break. By that I mean, let's show you the example. See? Now, don't get me wrong, we could still twist it and make it look like there's been an earthquake or something like that, which is handy. But you need to kind of factor that into whilst you're building your PCG, okay? So some PCGs you can create really easily to do things like this. Other PCGs you have to be slightly more careful about. And remember what I said, okay, that's not inside the remit of the tutorial we're doing right now, but we do also have the ability to do much more complex cave systems. So I'll grab down this one, this is BP PCG Complex Cave System. And even though this looks like, you know, a funky nightmare of difficulty, in actual fact, this is relatively easy. All this PCG that we're looking at here is the basics of the gantry system, just dialed up a little bit. So I've got rocks being placed at the sides using the placement system, and the rock on the bottom, and the rock here, and a ladder. It's just lots and lots and lots of parts. If I just grab the PCG Complex Cave System, I'll open it up for you, just here. So there we go. It's just these 3 parted nodes. So I'm sampling the spline data. I've got the basic cave walls here on each side, which is made from a mesh each. I've got the lower area of the wall and the rock struts. I've got the bottom of the cave, and then here I have some quarry cliff, and these are all fab assets, by the way. Then over here I'm just sampling some moss. This was something I did later, so I haven't put it in a thing yet. So sample moss onto spline, and then over here this is the actual path itself, which is the wooden gantry. And then over here, this thing called a collar, okay, is just basically the boundary that I set around it. And it's not connected at the minute, but this was to control shadowing. If I connect it together, you'll probably see it. I don't know if I've got it set up properly. There we go. And this was just to control shadowing. if I was using this in an area where I didn't want any shadow to come through any gaps where the meshes weren't quite created together. Okay, so this is just a collar going around the outside of it. I can turn that on and off. Okay, so this is your introduction to simple PCGs on splines. Okay, we will look at more complicated PCGs on splines because they are so much fun. They really are. But until then, have a practice. Use the assets available to you from, Quixel via fab.com, and start making yourself some really cool things, because, whether you're working individually or as part of a team, the PCG framework is so useful. I mean, if I just grab this spline here, drag it along, this one's created where I can make it curved, so I can just right click, I'll add a spline point, do that, jump inside of it, there. It's just remarkable what you can do with it, okay? You just need to be using your artist's eye and just do a little bit of pre-planning, sketch it out, decide what meshes you're going to use. And a final little interesting thing for you, go on then, you can have a bonus tip, okay? Because I was about to stop making this tutorial and I thought, you deserve a bonus tip for following this far. When you've finished making your PCG, okay, so this is all made here, over here on the right, if I pull up my details panel, I can scroll down inside of my PCG, which you can see is made out of not many items, to where it says PCG at the bottom. And with that selected, I'm just going to clear my PCG link. Now I'll delete my PCG complex cave system, and I am left with a perfect instanced mesh. This is just referencing these meshes here, so it is very light. PCG, fantastic. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye everybody.